30 years ago, the road from Beijing to Hong Kong was an unimportant corridor for Chinese economic growth. Most of the goods produced near Beijing were transported by rail. Delays increased costs, making Chinese products less competitive globally. Today, the Beijing-Hong Kong and Macau Expressway, stretching 1,400 miles from Beijing to Macau, is one of the most significant freight corridors in the world. Beijing understood that for China to become a global economic power, it needed world-class infrastructure. China engaged in a multi-decade investment project to develop thousands of miles of roads and railways. From 1992 to 2011, China spent an average of 8.5% of GDP per year, investing in transport and social and digital infrastructure. It is no surprise that this period of infrastructure expansion coincided with rapid national growth and laid the foundation for Chinese economic power for years to come. The United States now finds itself in the unenviable position of having some of the worst quality infrastructure in the developed world. For example, the Prime Minister of Pakistan said when he visited the United States, in New York, "I can't see a flat road." Americans should go and see China's infrastructure. In fact, in addition to being mentioned by Prime Minister Pakistan, China's infrastructure has also been mentioned by 3 U.S. presidents. They all targeted China and vowed to improve infrastructure and surpass China. Besides, the American Society of Civil Engineers 2021 report card for America's infrastructure rated the U.S. at a C overall, with 11 of 17 categories in the D range. Internet and cell phone services can be poor in rural parts of the country and patchy in urban areas. And, as made infamous by Flint, Michigan, some parts of the country's drinking water supply contain dangerous levels of lead. Yet federal infrastructure investment has dropped to the lowest level in 40 years measured relative to GDP and as a share of federal spending, despite a funding gap that the ASE puts at nearly $2.6 trillion. The drag on economic growth this underinvestment creates is not trivial. Estimates suggest U.S. households could lose out on as much as $3,300 per year from 2020 to 2039 if infrastructure is not revitalized. The declining state of American infrastructure exacerbates secular stagnation and leads to a lower growth trajectory. It appears that there has been no better time to invest heavily in infrastructure to support short and long-term economic growth. So, what can the Biden administration and the United States learn from China about infrastructure? Okay, as for today's video, let's dive deep into this issue. As we have mentioned just now, the American Society of Civil Engineers is the oldest infrastructure association in the United States. Their report is very detailed. According to their research data, the average age of American highways has exceeded 50 years, and the overall infrastructure level is at the just qualified C level. This report details the infrastructure in the United States. Among the 17 infrastructure categories, 11 important infrastructure such as roads, dams, schools, and transportation are rated D. Others, such as aviation and energy, still rely on strong government subsidies. After repairs, they barely reached the pass line. So, that's why the Pakistani Prime Minister teased. 2019, the Pakistani Prime Minister visited the United States and felt ups and downs like riding a roller coaster while passing through New York. After all, this is New York, the international financial center. Another example. In 2020, in an interview, Musk directly complained about the U.S. infrastructure, which is full of broken highways and bridges, much worse than China. Some people may ask, since American roads are so bad, why are they not repaired? In fact, it's not that they don't want to do it, it's that everyone wants to do, but they just can't. In every presidential election in the United States, candidates will make infrastructure repairs one of their commitments, and they will work hard for it, but they will be beaten by reality soon after, and even several governments have encountered the same problem. In 2008, Obama proposed a nearly $4 trillion infrastructure plan, but only 177 kilometers were built. In 2016, Trump proposed another $2 trillion infrastructure plan, but the result was the same. Then comes Biden's $2 trillion plan, the same plan. Can it be successful? In fact, the answer has been given as early as the Obama era. So, what can the Biden administration and the United States learn from China about infrastructure? First, China developed infrastructure as a part of its industrial policy drive. This meant building the arteries and veins of an export system was its priority, lifting its trade capacity. In China, most goods are transported by rail. In the US, some 60% of freight is transported by road. To enhance US productive capacity, fixing damaged roads and bridges is a vital start. Looking forward, supporting growing industries will involve both investing in those industries and strengthening conditions around them. As a developing country, China invested in industrial zones and transport networks. As a developed country, the US must center infrastructure within its own industrial policy. Second, infrastructure is not limited to transport. Beyond roads and bridges, China has successfully developed digital infrastructure, particularly broadband and digital payment systems, and municipal infrastructure like sewage and water. During the pandemic, students and businesses in areas with poor internet have fallen further behind the rest of the country. A competitive economy requires strong digital infrastructure. To tackle social inequalities, the US must provide clean, safe drinking water to every citizen, a necessity to which almost 30 million Americans lack reliable access. Most important, the next wave of infrastructure development must integrate green principles. As the Chinese government has discovered the hard way, the negative spillovers from infrastructure can create social unrest and limit economic growth. Greening buildings and developing carbon-neutral infrastructure can ensure longevity and create much-needed jobs. And as the energy catastrophe in Texas shows, building climate-resilient infrastructure is not optional as extreme weather events become more frequent. In addition, for the U.S., greening is critical since carbon emissions from transportation are a plurality of all carbon emissions in the country. And, as the Chinese experience demonstrates, modernizing infrastructure includes greener new builds and adapting prior assets to become greener. For those concerned about expanding budget deficits, China, again, is instructive. The fiscal multiplier from infrastructure investment is significant because it expands productive capabilities of the country. The Congressional Budget Office estimated the limited infrastructure spending of the American Reinvestment and Recovery Act of 2009 to have a multiplier of 0.4x to 2.2x. In other words, if done correctly, the benefits to the economy could far outweigh spending that would be spread over years, not months as in the COVID-19 relief packages. China has been able to rapidly outgrow its debt and keep interest payments to a minimum. There is every reason the U.S. should be able to do the same. Raising taxes in a targeted way, a consistent priority for Democrats, also remains a viable path to finance a portion of infrastructure spending. Infrastructure investment is critical to creating new sources of growth that will shape the economic future of the United States and help tackle social issues like inequality, stagnant real incomes, and declining economic dynamism. When it comes to economic planning and infrastructure development, there are vital lessons in China for the U.S. and the world. With real interest rates at historic lows, and the political calculus for deficits rightly shifting, it is time to lay the groundwork for the next 50 years. The American Rescue Plan sets up the U.S. economy for 2 years of impressive growth. An ambitious infrastructure plan could propel the U.S. economy toward a decade of sustainable economic development. The federal government has a vital role to play in infrastructure, one it has neglected for decades. President Biden and Congress would do well to not waste this crisis and favorable political and borrowing conditions. The time for a significant increase in infrastructure investment has arrived. Well, thanks for listening. If you have any suggestions, just leave them in the comments section. See you next time.